Same as 68.
Yeah, and the same
You're
age as
my
my
age.
brother. Right. My older brother is 68 also.
Your older brother's 68.
So he's just a year older.
Old is Len. He's the
Len
baby.
is, yeah, he's the baby. He's 1 year younger.
Oh, is a year between all of you?
That's right.
Yeah.
So we've been close because of the age closeness too. My younger brother and I, of course, exceptionally close.
It's interesting. Yeah, 60.
My older brother was always, he went to the conservatory as a youngster. They thought he was a budding piano pianist, you know, a genius. They made him out a genius as a child in every direction. The poor kid was going downtown from the suburbs to conservatory when he was about 7 or 8 years old by himself, by train, subway, tram, streetcars, and what have you. And as a result, he had no fingernails to this day.
Oh my God.
And he was always considered much more grown up than he really was, and he had to swallow this. So he was bald by the time he was 20.
Like me.
You know.
I wasn't completely bald, but I was pretty bald.
Yeah, well, like my brother, he was very handsome, but his hair was going very, even when he was a teenager. Well, my father, of course, was also, he had the same haircut that we do. But anyway, the point was that he was being pressured really beyond his desire or sensibility, but he was a good boy in his own way. And he was bright. He has a phenomenal memory. He has photographic type of memory. So he always did well on anything. He was a top student all his life. And he skipped grades, so, you know, he entered university at 15 and so forth. He gave up piano by that time. He had quit the conservatory, but he's always retained the love of music. No, he never went on with music. He went to, he's a doctor, and so he went on into medical.
He's a psychiatrist.
He's a psychoanalyst.
He is a psychoanalyst.
But an MD psychoanalyst?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's more than that. He's he's got 2 degrees on top of his MD. One degree that only about 10 people in the world have. I mean, he was an MD at 21, the youngest doctor in America, and the top doctor, I mean, you know, the national exams, like my nephew also has done the same thing again at the same school as well. And my brother had his name at the, still has at the medical school, a gold plaque because he was the best student they ever had. As an undergraduate, he had nothing but straight A's. He graduated summa cum laude. I was a freshman when he was a senior, coming in with a brother who was, he was the dean's assistant, who was the dean was a psychologist, and the president of the school then also was a psychologist and ran the Smithsonian afterthoughts. And he's still, I don't know, maybe he's still alive, but the dean is still alive. He's still alive. But anyway, they were very close, and that turned him in the direction of psychology instead of pure medicine. But he went on to medical school, and mind you, he was a 4-letter man in sports as well. So he's always loved sports, and he's still very active in sports. He plays, swims, and plays tennis, even with a bypass operation, skis, and so forth. He loves all of this, swimming. But then he was sponsored by the Army because he was deferred. This was during the war. That's one of the reasons he went through faster, because the courses were speeded up during the war period. So he went through medical school in 2 years because you went the whole year then. And he remained, and they put a gold plaque for his work in anatomy. He was so extraordinary at that. And then he got interested in psychiatry. As an intern, he became more and more interested in Chicago. And when he got married, then he was stationed in San Francisco for a bit, well, in San Antonio, then San Francisco, and then in L.A. And I lived with them in L.A. just after their first child was born in '47. And he section of the hospital then. And I sat in with him a little. He wanted me to see cases and so forth. Other doctors have used me also in San Diego. A classmate of his who did internship with him in Chicago, who works out of San Francisco, and we're friendly with, took me on a tour, also used me as a paramedical. He had cases that were very serious cases with a little psychological problems, treating, you know, a woman with breast cancer, black woman, young woman, who was suicidal. And I met her the day she was about to be released, and I introduced her just as a friend, just to make her feel more relaxed. But she was okay. She was coming out of it. Another guy, terminal patient with sicknesses and so forth. Just to make contact with people, to make the people without family who are in basic condition, having a hard time, and just to bring an outsider. He wanted me to work with him there. He had a special government funded program with all sorts of different people from different groups working with the artists and so forth. He was working with the black children, teenagers who were from broken families, having his clinic at the hospital handle these kids. It was part of a program he asked me to come when I was in Japan. It would have been paid well and so forth. And it was work I would have enjoyed doing, but I said it wasn't fair. That 3 years with the kids, they would get attached. And then I would be like somebody rejecting them again. I said it isn't fair. You should use a local person who can maintain contact, who would be living there. But
Your brother still practicing?
my brother still practices. Yeah. He loves his practice. He's done teaching. He's taught at the Einstein School a good deal too.
Does he do individual treatment with patients?
Well, he was earning more money when he was in his early 20s than I've ever earned already. So he's, and he worked with a doctor here in New York who was one of the most far-out psychoanalysts in the world.
Who is that?
Dr. John Rosen, who's still alive, he tells me. Well, Rosen is a man who can't write. He can hardly write his name practically, so he's almost unknown because very little literature about him. But he trained so many others. He would always deal with the most difficult patients, real psychotic people. He would go to the asylums and demonstrate for doctors the most intractable patients, people that couldn't make contact with. And within a half an hour, he would have contact with them. All the doctors watching. Because, you know, a guy says, I'm Napoleon. And John says, you can't be. I'm Napoleon. And immediately, you know, he's thrown them out of whack, and they have to respond to this thing. This is a new situation. They have to understand that they're dealing with somebody who's with them, as it were, in the same boat. He was the first to take patients home, to live with him for years in his own home with his own family. Well, my brother worked with this guy, and he was wowed by him. Of course, there's all the people that worked with him and worshipped the guy. But it's not my brother's temperament. And so he gave it up. He's pure Freudian analyst. He's a very sweet man. But,
He'll be there soon.
and he works with usually with artistic people, his patients. Many of them famous
Autistic?
people. Artistic.
Autistic.
Autistic brings me in mind of another friend who's coming into this reading, who's going to be reading himself, a young poet who's in Illinois, who's married to a lovely woman. He has 2 daughters, one of whom is autistic. And this has long before I knew him, I was interested in this problem and read a great deal, but he has gotten me more involved yet. because I'm interested in this little girl of his, and of course controls the life. I don't know if you know anything about autism. This is a physical impairment, actually, in the brain, some kind of genetic damage. And the child doesn't grow normally. It isn't anything physical that you can see looking at. But the child, it seems to be very slow not to speak and to behave in abnormal ways. And you can't communicate with the child. Often happens to...
I worked with them, you know, Cid, and they walk through you as though you're an object, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the strangest experience.
And if too many people speak at the same time, they get almost crazy because they can't focus on more than one point at a time. They can be very intense in their focus. But and their daughter they adore. And she has a sister who are almost the same age, and they get along beautifully. And she can, obviously, make very good attachments. And there is a famous case, of course, this woman who goes around lecturing, who's autistic herself, who's grown up and is an expert in her field, which is an odd field. Temple Grandin, her name. And she's written a book about her life, and some of it is startling. It should be made into a film because it's very dramatic. Some of the early scenes when she was a child are just so dramatic that they're shattering scenes. And the mother is so good with the child and slowly learning how to live with this child and realize what's really going on, to try to grasp the way a mind is working is very difficult, especially when it's coming in such an unusual way of working. And so the girl is going to regular school, but the teacher isn't grasping, and it's probably too hard for her to handle amongst other children.
It's such a bizarre...
So the child, you know, will have tantrums and these kinds of things and strike out at other kids unexpectedly. It seems unexpected. And nobody really knows where she's coming from. But of course, her mother and father do understand where she's coming from, but they're not there at the moment, at that moment. So they thought they had a good teacher, and it turns out not. And they really would like her to stay in the public school to make friends and so forth. Temple Grandin was a girl who became from a fairly well-to-do family. But these children tend to be rather intellectual and bright family lines, which is another part of it. They're not lower-class children. And this thing is scattered all over. In Japan, they've got it too. So it's not unique to America, but or England, where a lot of study on it has been done. But this girl became an expert in the management of how to control the killing of cattle in the stockyards. She devised a machine to do it in the most painless and easiest way. It's a strange kind of thing.
You left me.
But it's a weird kind of thing. But she's the world's expert on this now. And everybody, people in farming and cattle breeding go to her for advice on how to design their things and the meat business and so forth. And she's horrified. She was horrified. She originally watched this happening, and she was horrified by the way it was done, and she wanted to do something to make it more humane.
What do they do? They usually
with
knock
a
them
mallet
on the head and then cut the throat. I told you, they're setting up a lot of heat now, and I want to shut off the radiators before they drive me out of the building.
Yeah, I think so.
These things are piping
So
hot.
you know what, I heard something, because I've been so interested in these children, because I worked with them. Have you heard this about the man in Switzerland who's discovered that some of them have incredible sensitivity to sound?
Yeah.
And that's one reason that voices can set them completely, that they're like hyper sensitive to sound. And what to us would just be a normal voice is just an assault on them.
John Martone, the father here, he stays very au courant. He travels great distances, and he's meshed with other families. Yeah. Some of whom have been almost destroyed.
Oh, I know it, because it's such a
he and his wife
tremendous thing.
I